Most of us are familiar with that song by Melissa Etheridge that she wrote to go with Al Gore's movie, An Inconvenient Truth. And like everything in the world, we can look out there, but the same is always true in here. And so as I've been just sort of singing this song this week in preparation for today, I'm thinking, we ignore those distant rumblings. Distant in physical distance? No. Distance isn't we put them way to the back of our minds because we'd rather not think about that. And so there comes a time when, yes, we are perfect beings just as we are, and there's a longing within us to fulfill that truth of who we are. And that's the change that I'm talking about here. Getting closer, unlearning the stuff we learned that doesn't serve us, and getting back to who we really are. So for the last several weeks, we've been talking about the 12 steps, which started out as the 12 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous, and since then has been adopted by numerous groups. There's no end to how many people, how many different types of people with different types of addictions, or not even addictions, just other it's a spiritual solution to what looks like a physical problem, but is really a spiritual problem. That's what the founders of AA did. They found a spiritual solution. Einstein said, you will never solve anything at the level of the problem. As long as you keep working on the problem, it's not going to work. But if you jump to the level of the solution, that's where all the good stuff happens. And so we're talking about transformation here. Not transformation into somebody that we're not, but transformation into being more the truth of who we always were, but have forgotten. From generations upon generations upon generations of lies that humans have told each other and passed down to us. And so we're starting to let those go because we found, first of all, in step one, we had to admit that we were powerless over all this stuff out there. We are powerless. We have an illusion that we have control of things, but we don't actually have control. And so in step two, we come to this understanding that there is a spiritual solution. There is something larger than my human self. And that something larger brings me to the solution. Came to believe that a power greater than ourselves could restore us. I love that. Restore us to sanity. And then in step three, we made a decision to turn our will and our lives over to the care of God as we understood God. And then last week we talked about that place where the rubber really meets the road in that program, where we actually take a good, close look, a searching and fearless moral inventory of ourselves. What's really going on? What have I really done? What are the thinking patterns that I have that lead me to behaviors that don't serve me and that don't serve the world? Not because judgment, there's no reason to judge. The reason we do that is to get clear, again, about who we are and who we can be. And then we share that. We share it with God, with ourselves, and with another human being. In other words, we don't give ourselves an out. We don't go, okay, but I don't want to think about that anymore. We share it. We share it with the God of understanding. We share it with ourselves. We share it with another human being, because then it's harder to take it back once you've said it. So this week we're talking about steps 6 and 7. Step 6 is we're entirely ready to have God remove all these defects of character. That's a short sentence, but there's a lot to unpack in there. So first, our task is to become ready. Ready. Well, I am ready. I don't want to do that stuff anymore. I don't want to do the stuff that doesn't serve me. I don't want to be the one screaming in the house. I don't want to be the one livid in traffic. I don't want to be that person. Of course I'm ready. But are we ready? But are we ready? And what stands in the way of our readiness? And I'll tell you the truth, the first time through the program, I got to this and that was exactly what of course I'm ready. Next step. Later on, as I was going back through the steps, it was like, oh, if those aren't gone, then perhaps I wasn't entirely ready. Why wasn't I ready? Well, perhaps I'm afraid to change. This is how I've known myself my whole life. I know how to deal with what's going on now. I don't know how to deal with the unknown because it's unknown. So I have to face some fear, the fear of change. Because the truth is, if you change, everybody around you will change. Not to your order, not necessarily to your liking. But when you change one element, it changes the whole. And that's exactly what we talk about here in New Thought, in the Church of One Love. We are one. And so every time one of us remembers the love that we really are, we change the whole. That's how we change the world. We get peaceful not by knocking down all the people who are violent so they can't be violent anymore, but by becoming peaceful ourselves and then sharing that peace wherever we go. This is what happens. And so we get ready. Who we are starts to change when we identify the patterns that we've held that don't serve us and are ready to let go of that. One of the reasons that we don't want to change is because there's a payoff to not changing. So what's your payoff? I have a little cartoon up here I want to have Perry put up, and I've told you can't read it, so I'm just going to read it to you. This is from the cartoon strip, 1998. I've carried this around with me since then. Matt Groening, who you know who he is, and it's called Life in Hell. He used to have this cartoon strip, and it's what's your deal? Well, one person's deal is I get to be happy occasionally as long as the rest of the time I make sure I'm miserable. I get to hate everyone as long as I hate myself too. It's deep, man. I get to have a full, busy, exciting life as long as I keep running around in circles. I get to be a failure as long as it proves to the world that my parents did me wrong. How many of us don't want to let go of our stories because if we're okay, we can't blame somebody else anymore? I get to experience the joy of total freedom as long as I do exactly as my guru tells me. I get to be sad and lonely as long as everyone knows I'm a poor little lamb that's lost its way. Little pity there. I get to win in the end as long as I procrastinate long enough. Oops, now they're just meddling. I get to be successful in a job I hate as long as I don't have to risk failing at something I love. Ring any bells? I get to be happy as long as watching TV and drinking beer constitutes happiness. Good enough. I get to substitute pleasure for happiness. I get to want to be happier as long as I don't want to be happier. I get to meditate in utter serenity as long as I don't think about the cat box smell. Yeah, the cat box smell being all the things in the outside. Yeah. So I'm not going to read all of them, but you get it. What's your deal? We make a deal with ourselves, and in our deal, there's a payoff for us, or we wouldn't still be doing what we've been doing that doesn't serve us. So a very important question is to ask, what's the payoff? What's the payoff? Well, I can't blame anybody anymore. We like to blame somebody. And that's why a lot of people in therapy go to the point of finding out what the root of the problem is without continuing on to find the solution, because the root of the problem probably is in your family of origin. Yes, they did do it wrong. All of them did in some way. I did it to my daughter. We pass it on that way. But if you stop there, now I know why I am like I am, and that's just the way I am. So I get to be that forever and ever as long as I have somebody to point to say, that's why I am that way. You don't understand. I was abused. You don't understand. I grew up in an alcoholic home. You don't understand. I was never taught that. Well, guess what? You're grown up now. You get to teach yourself. You get to go behind. Knowing where it came from is only useful in as much as it helps you to let it go and go on to the next step. We run out of our excuses We run out of our excuses. And that's a big payoff to not changing, because it's easier to stay the same, be a poor little lamb, as long as everybody knows that there's a reason I'm a poor little lamb. But why be a poor little lamb? Do you want to be that? I remember my mother asking my sister one time, because my sister was adopted when she was 8 years old, and she had had horrific abuse as a youngster. And my parents adopted her at age 8, and her teen years were hard. Oh, they were hard. Oh, they were hard. She was on a self-destructive bent. And I remember my mother saying, you know, dear, you can have a miserable life and no one will ever blame you because of what you've been through. But do you want a miserable life? Is that what you want? Because at some point, no one's doing it to us. We've taken it on ourselves. As Don Miguel Ruiz says, we've taken these agreements, we've written them into a book of law, we carry that book with us, and we judge ourselves. We don't need anybody else to judge us. We're judging ourselves, right? So we get to choose. We get to choose. And so that payoff, I get to stay as is as long as I ignore the pain. And not shake anything up because, And here's the lie I tell myself. Everything's okay right now. Don't disturb it. And maybe it'll stay that way. Nope. No such thing as stasis. We're either growing or we're dying. Really. That's true in the natural world. That's true of us mentally and emotionally and spiritually. We're either growing or we're going in the other direction. But we want to grow, don't we? And this is what we do too. No decision. I'm just not going to make a decision about that. It's too hard. No decision is a decision. It's a decision not to do anything, and then we have consequences to that too. There's no way to evade consequences. And so we begin to look at what is the payoff and ask ourselves, am I willing to let that go? I remember my first couple years in the Unity Church. I was freaked out, really. I was there because I was being paid to be there as a soloist. And every Sunday I would think, okay, if they start doing really anything real weird, I'm out of here, okay? They seem really nice and they talk about love. It all makes sense to me so far, but I'm ready to be out of here as soon as they start getting too weird. And then one Sunday I remember thinking, I agree with everything they're saying, but something is missing. Something doesn't just feel quite like it should. And one day I realized, oh, what's missing is hellfire and damnation. And once I went, okay. Well, I think I'm okay without that part. I think I'll just stay where I am. And that was a huge shift for me to go, oh, nothing is missing except the habit of feeling bad about myself. Or worse, of coming to church in order to feel bad about myself. Don't want to do that anymore. I can let that go, but I had to know what it was before I could let it go. So that's the deal with 4 and 5. And then 6 is really having a come to Jesus, if you will, with yourself. Am I willing? Am I entirely ready? Or am I still hanging on by my little fingernails? To have God remove. To have God removed. That doesn't mean one thing I heard, I think the first time through is I became entirely ready to work really, 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 really hard on what's wrong with me and try to change it. And that's not what it says. It says entirely ready to have God remove. We little human selves of ourselves can do nothing, but there is that within us, which is all things, which is connected to all the love there is, which is all the love that there is. So when we can get our little human selves out of the way and allow that spirit of love, then that will take care, not our figuring it out. I'm a person who likes to figure things out. You may have figured that out about me. But sometimes you just can't figure it out. You have to let it go and trust something higher. Entirely ready to have God remove. To remove by Webster means to separate from. Doesn't necessarily mean they're smashed flat and they never come back, but I get a spiritual reprieve. I get to step away from the things that I have done that that don't serve me, that cause harm to myself or others. Now, I admit, sometimes I step right back. But again, I can let go and allow God to remove that from me. And we use this, a lot of people really get upset with this language, defects of character. Remove all these defects of character. You're not defective. And that's not what these writers were trying to get to. And it's certainly not the way I use it. Except, again, according to Webster, is something lacking for completion is one way of describing a defect. There's something lacking in order to be complete. Am I willing to say there might be some things that I haven't quite got together in order to make myself the complete and whole person that I believe myself to be? Yeah. So I'm just going to leave all that up to God. Help me. And that doesn't mean I'm going to sit in a chair and go, change me. It means I'm going to cooperate with my guidance. I'm going to pay attention to what comes into my life. I'm going to respond to my world rather than reacting in the old ways that I've always reacted. Another fear is that we'll lose our identity. If I'm not the caretaker, if I'm not the one who tells everybody what to do and is right all the time, I'm talking about somebody else. If I'm not that, who am I? Who am I? We identify with our character defects. We don't want to. If anybody says you've identified with a part of yourself that you really don't like at all, it would be easy to say, well, I don't want to do that. And yet, when it's not out in the light, that's what we do all the time. We identify ourselves with something about us that is not for our best. Step 7 then says, humbly asked God to remove our shortcomings. Humbly ask. Now, humbly is a word that I think some people in New Thought have a problem with. I'm not humble. I'm great. I'm God. God lives in me. Yes, absolutely. And in this little human self, are you all of God? No. No more than one. A wave is ocean. It's nothing but ocean. But a wave is not the whole ocean. Right? You've got God in you. You are filled, replete with that. But you're not all of it. Not while you're wearing this tight little human body, these tight little human emotions that come along with it, all those feelings. And so we allow God, the bigger part of us, the connected part of us, to do that. And we humbly ask. Humiliation is something that someone does to you to try to shame you, or that you do to yourself to shame you. Humility, which is what we're talking about here, is seeing yourself as right-sized. I am no better or worse than any other being. I am the love, and I am the humanness that sometimes distorts the love. I am all of that. And so I humbly ask to get that little self out of the way so that the big self that knows exactly what to do can have its way in me. Can have its way in me. Humbly ask God to remove our shortcomings. And I like that they changed defects of character to shortcomings. It means just falling a little short. You're not quite at completion. I think the reason they used that other word was to kind of clarify what they meant by the step before. I'm just not quite there. And so step 7 is about allowing. Allowing. And what is allowing about? It means we don't push the river. It means we sit and float on the river and let the river do its work. It means our egos, although we can't get rid of them during this lifetime, we don't put them in the driver's seat. We put them in the passenger seat. Our spirit is the river. Our spirit is the driver. And the ego gets to sit on his little inner tube and float on it, not the other, doesn't get to dam it up, right? Too often our egos are trying to build dams. Too often our egos are trying to take the wheel. But spirit sits at the wheel. So here's the deal. When we say humbly ask God to remove our shortcomings, that means when we're giving it up to God, when we're allowing, when we're surrendering, we've used all of those words since we started the study. Surrender, allow, let go, let God. When we're doing all of that, we don't get to dictate what and when and how much. That's not the defect I want to work on. This one's the one that's bugging me. Get rid of it now. I want it gone. I want patience and I want it now. There's Veruca Salt again. I want the world. Yeah, we don't get to do that. We get to say, okay, I've given it up. I was entirely ready. I am ready. I'm going to try to avoid slipping back into those habits that make me reach for blame and reach for excuses. I'm going to do my best to avoid that and to allow the Spirit of God to work through me to do its work. Because does it need to do all Melinda's work, little Melinda? Or does it need to do the work of love that I am here to do, that embodied Melinda just happens to be engaged in at least some of the time, right? So we allow it to happen. It's all about allowing. And then I get to take my hands off. Once again, it's a process of letting go. Don't you hate that? I like to hold on to things. So we ask not our humanness. We don't ask it of our human selves. We ask it of spirit, and then we let go. We let God be God in us. We try to give a little rest to our little scared ego. Just sit down. You'll be fine. You'll be fine. Sit on the inner tube. We're safe. We're safe in this river of God. And then watch what happens. Watch what happens when we let go. In my experience, what happens is love. What happens is joy. What happens is peace. Are you ready? Yeah. Thank you. So we're just going to take a few of those ideas into meditation. So first of all, just get your body situated. And breathe. You don't have to tell yourself how to breathe. Here's a practice in allowing God to be God in you. God is breathing you. You don't have to remember to breathe. You don't have to think about it. It just happens. And in the same way, by not holding our breath, which sometimes we do, have you noticed that? We get upset, we hold our breath. We get our will wound up and ready to assert itself. We hold our breath. And so we have this constant reminder that God is breathing us, God is doing us, God is expressing as each one of us, and doesn't need a lot of input. Doesn't need input from the ego. And so we've been on this journey through these steps of realizing we don't have it all together. But we are consciously, continually connected to the solution, the answer, the one who does have it all together, the one love, the one presence, the one power. God in us. And we breathe into that. And then things get easier. When we listen to the guidance that says, hey, honey, you've been holding on tight for a long time. Why don't you rest those fingers? Why don't you sit down and breathe? in you. And in this time of quiet, in this time of listening instead of talking with our minds, just listening, we connect with that stillness. And that scripture, be still and know that I am God. Be still. Because when you are still for a moment, you will know, you can know that this great I am works through you. Be still and know that I am. Be still and know. Be still. Be. And so it is. Amen. So now's the time